Lorraine pressed her palm flat against the smooth patch of wall right beside her door, feeling the subtle coolness of paint over plaster. It was one of those mid-June evenings that stayed light longer than she expected, but the fading sun was filtered mostly away by the curtains her niece liked to keep drawn, so only the peachy edges of outdoor color crept into the quiet upstairs landing. It was a small, safe scene. She was used to darker, older places, from the brick apartment in Queens where her late husband died, to the tiny windowless room at the rehab center last winter, so the gentle quiet here in Amanda's house seemed almost a gift. She'd been here for 8 days now. No, starting her 9th. That felt strange, how whole days slid by with little rhyme or grand event. Wake up, tea, her little pills with carefully measured breakfast, and then the chores she insisted on taking over, because it kept her moving. Amanda left for work before sunrise, and Tim, her husband, worked from his laptop in the downstairs home office, ducking out only for coffee and quick questions about dinner. The only other presence, a child, little Maya, 5 years old, was only around in the later afternoons with stories about the sandbox at kindercare. Lorraine liked her routines, the sturdy ring of her cane on clean polished floors, that special hush just before everyone came home. Her room was at the end of the hall, simply decorated, smelling faintly of lavender from sachets Amanda had tucked under the pillow. It was a good room. The hallway outside was carpeted in a pale tan, perhaps too new, still a little plush for her taste. There were sturdy wooden doors, the 3 bedrooms and, near the center, the bathroom, each painted with a glossy white that caught any shard of afternoon light from the small landing window. Sometimes, Lorraine went out just to dust the little table by the stairs or peer down and watch for Amanda's car, letting herself become gently bored. The first oddness crept in quietly. That particular Thursday evening, she stepped out of her room just after 11, her mind on the glass of water she'd left on the bathroom counter, forgetting it in her lazy bedtime haze. She clicked her cane gently against the corner as always, listening to the distinct clockwork of her own footsteps. There was a hush overhead, a silence that didn't feel ominous, just uninhabited. Tim and Amanda had gone to bed early, and the child's door was gently ajar, as it usually was. All as usual. Except, as she walked those 13 steps, she'd counted them several times in restless moments, the journey seemed a notch longer. She paused halfway, peered behind her down the undisturbed stretch of hallway. Nothing out of the ordinary. Still, the trip felt just a little off, like she'd walked a few paces too many, or perhaps her stride had slowed under the faint pulsing of nighttime aches. Lorraine shook her head, telling herself she simply needed to walk more during the day. Minds grew idle and odd when denied tasks, she told herself. She found her glass, drank, and returned, crossing the same stretch a little more deliberately before easing herself into her bed to let herself drift off. The next morning, Lorraine woke with the usual stiffness, and for a few minutes she forgot the oddity completely. But as she made her way from her room to the bathroom for her morning routine, she found herself counting her steps again, 1, 2, 3. She tried to hide the habit by humming something tuneless. This time, on her way back, she counted 14. She brushed it off. Maybe she'd started from the wrong spot. Maybe she'd drifted left or right. Houses settled and creaked, perhaps her sense of space was just rusty. With daylight pouring in from the half-open landing window, everything looked perfectly fine. Amanda was in the kitchen, cheerfully assembling lunchboxes. Tim called a soft good morning up the stairs. The hallway's walls were smooth and unremarkable, decorated with family photos, Amanda and Tim on their wedding day, little Maya with a grin so wide her cheeks almost dimpled into her ears. Lorraine traced her finger along the edge of one frame, thinking of the neatness of this life, so unlike her own cluttered old apartment. It became a light, private ritual: walk the hall, count the steps. She never said a word about it, not even as a joke. She simply found herself noticing, more and more, the way her own movement felt measured. Sometimes, in the quiet lull between lunch and the time Maya came home, she'd sit outside her door and watch the hallway, as if waiting for something in the pattern to shift. She checked the bathroom lock that afternoon, running her hand over the familiar old-fashioned latch. It was the kind built more for privacy than true security, and as she tested it, she caught herself glancing at the two bedroom doors further down, one for Maya, another for Amanda and Tim, lined up perfectly neat and unchanged in all the time she'd spent here. Of course, she reassured herself, nothing was out of place. The three doors, the bathroom, and the winking little landing light switch, all where they belonged. Yet, that feeling of stretched space tugged at the edge of her mind. That night, she stepped carefully from her bedroom with her cane in one hand and her slippers making almost no sound. She moved slowly, counting again, 1, 2, 3, all the way to 15. She paused, turned, and counted her way back. The stretch felt longer, or perhaps her nerves were playing up. She reminded herself that idle thoughts could fill any void. The days slid by in this gentle routine. Morning perhaps brought more muscle aches, but the newness of her bedroom slowly wore off, and the carpet in the hallway started to show the barest hint of a track where she walked most. Some evenings, after Maya was tucked in, Lorraine would sit at the far end of the hall in an old chair Amanda had set up for her by the window, looking out at the neighbor's yard, watching for the faint flicker of porch lights going out. She noticed things, like how the hall light made a sleepy glow on the freshly painted wall, how the baseboards looked stubbornly the same, and how, when she shut her eyes for a long handful of seconds, she could still imagine the precise shape and length of the corridor behind her. Yet any time she measured with her pace, she felt the tiniest hesitation: the hallway still felt a little too long. Not glaringly, not so much that she would mention it, but enough that it made her more cautious at night, though nothing ever seemed to come of her worry. One Thursday evening, Amanda lingered as Lorraine cleared plates. "Are you sleeping okay up there? I know it's a new space, and we're all getting used to this," she said, almost sheepish. Lorraine smiled, waved it off. "Just a little old lady fussiness. Sleeping like a baby. The house is lovely." That was the truth, so far as she wanted it. But after Amanda went to bed, Lorraine sat listening to the quiet house. There was nothing to hear except a clock in the living room below, the soft rumble of distant traffic, maybe Tim's gentle laugh at something on TV. The hallway above her stood in shadow, undisturbed. Soon enough, routine called again. She needed her nighttime water. She needed to check the window, make sure it was secure. So she rose, picked up her cane, and stepped into the dim corridor. As she moved, her count went to 16. She stopped, letting the numbers run through her head. Had it always been 16? The wall at her left felt a little farther away, as if the house were stretching in its sleep. She made herself laugh quietly. Houses did that, didn't they? Settling, breathing, making old beams creak and carpets shift. She wouldn't let herself fret. Still, when she got back into bed, Lorraine didn't drift off as easily. She lay there, eyes open, ears pricked for any irregularity. Nothing came. Just the comfortable night, and the gentle feeling that the hallway, somehow, was waiting with her. And so the days cycled onward, quiet and calm, with only the subtlest feeling that something ordinary had grown quietly, impossibly altered. Lorraine carried herself through the following week with a polished calm, careful not to betray any strangeness to Amanda or anyone else in the household. Mornings began with her usual stiffness, but her body seemed to adjust to the routine of the polished suburban home. She noticed, sometimes during breakfast while listening to Amanda's light chatter about work schedules and swim lesson sign-ups, that she was paying more attention to her own reflection in the mirror, searching her face for signs of confusion or slips in memory. Everything looked as it should. But the hallway persisted in her mind. Each afternoon when the house grew quiet and sunbeams shifted from direct to a milky gold, Lorraine made her regular slow trip from her bedroom to the bathroom. She counted. Sometimes, in her slippers, she lost track and had to start again. 17. The number nagged at her like a pebble in an otherwise perfect shoe. She inspected the hallway's length one morning, using more than her usual tools. She stood at the far end, squinting, and started to count tiles and the wooden slats in the baseboard. She knew from her years in New York that walls could play tricks on old eyes, but there was something in the sheer uniformity that unsettled her rather than soothed. There were 3 bedroom doors, the bathroom, and a linen closet at the midpoint. Each door had the same handle, cool and slightly curved. Nothing was new, but nothing was exactly how she remembered, either. Lorraine tried to test her own sanity by asking Maya, in the kindest possible way, to count her steps as she dashed from the bathroom to her bedroom one day. Maya laughed and leapt with childish vigor, counting each hop. She counted 12, squinting back at Lorraine's furrowed brow. "You forgot to take big steps like me, Nana," she giggled, and ran into her room. Lorraine tried not to think about that as she stood by the linen closet, afraid, for a reason she couldn't quite name, to take her own measurement aloud in front of anyone else. There were other changes, small and easy to dismiss. The square patch of sunlight at the end of the hall looked slightly longer, just a trick of afternoon shadows. The landing window stuck a bit more than before. Some nights, Lorraine felt that the thin hum of silence lasted a little too long as she walked the hall. She told herself it was the hush of new suburbs, different from the city background noise she once found comforting. But the hallway grew, undeniably. 18 steps, sometimes 19. She tried walking heel to toe, more deliberately, as if forcing the corridor to shrink back. The floor had a subtle spring to it, or maybe her own nerves did. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, she walked the hall with the light off, letting the thin moonlight slip through the window. She stood perfectly still by the bathroom door, expecting her ears to ring with echoes, or some sign that this was just her old age inventing patterns. Instead, there was only the absolute mundane quiet, and a distant sense that the space around her didn't feel quite as familiar as it had the night before. Lorraine made notes on a scrap envelope, tucking it under her pillow. Numbers for each night: 14, 15, 17, 19. She stopped after a few days, feeling a faint shame, like tracking imaginary aches in a diary, afraid to show anyone. The scrap of paper felt heavier than it should, as if recording the change somehow cemented it into reality. At dinner, Amanda pressed again, "Mom, you're not scared of staying here on your own, are you?" Lorraine smiled, reassuring, "This house is the quietest place I've ever lived." And it was. The only disruption was her own strange sense of the hallway. Once, while dusting the picture frames, Lorraine stopped at a family photo showing the exact same hallway as it had been a year ago, carpeting a lighter shade before Amanda had it redone. In the picture, the rooms seemed closer together. She traced her finger from door to door in the photograph, then turned and looked at the distance in reality. A subtle push of unease pressed at her chest. Kept busy by small tasks, Lorraine did her best not to focus on the corridor. The days pressed on, filled with errands, TV, and slow-cooked dinners. If the hallway's length bothered anyone else, they never said. The carpet, though, now showed a slightly uneven path, as if heavy feet, or a repeated journey, had pressed a track into the plush fibers. Lorraine asked Amanda about it over tea, and Amanda looked puzzled. "I love that you're wearing it in for us," she joked. Some evenings, Lorraine stayed up later than usual, choosing to linger in the downstairs den with a book. She found herself dreading the long walk at night, feeling exposed in the empty corridor. She took to leaving the landing and bathroom lights burning, even when Amanda chided her gently about the power bill. "Old people like brightness," Lorraine quipped, trying to keep the subject light. But alone, late at night, with lights on, the hallway looked almost unfamiliar, stretched, empty, echoing in a way no hallway in a friendly family house ever should. Small details began to shift. The linen closet, always tucked in at the midpoint, felt as if it had migrated a little further from the bathroom. The light fixture overhead, a dull circular plate, seemed a step farther from the baseboard each night. Lorraine dared herself to memorize each detail, but they remained stubbornly unsettled in her mind. One Tuesday night, Lorraine woke needing the bathroom. She rolled over, checked her watch, 3:17 a.m., and sat up, reaching for her cane. When she opened her door, the stretch of hallway beyond looked almost unfamiliar. She started her count. 1, 2, 3. 19. 20. There was an extra panel of baseboard, she was certain. The little table by the stairs looked farther away, as if forced toward the landing. Lorraine pressed her palm to the wall and waited, hoping the dizziness would pass. When she reached the bathroom door, her heart thudded with a quiet fear she refused to show on her face in daylight. She dressed the next morning a little slower, paying extra attention to every step. She hesitated by her own door, feeling as though her presence alone added to the sense of long distance in the corridor. Crossing to Maya's room for their morning hug, the trip felt even longer. 21 steps, which made her breath catch in her chest. Some mornings, Lorraine heard faint shifting noises through the walls, in the silent way a house expands or contracts, she assumed. But the rhythm was off, 3 soft thumps, then a pause, then a quiet shuffle. No distinct voices or footsteps, just the subtle suggestion of life beyond the walls and places that no one should be. She tried to tell herself it was simple acoustics, the way noise moved strangely in a quiet new house. But a doubt pressed into her mind, as if the hallway itself was gently filling up with space where it shouldn't. Lorraine started avoiding long, direct walks down the hallway. She'd find an excuse to linger by the window, pausing by each family photo longer than necessary, determined to fix the distances in her mind with careful focus. She found herself wanting to open every door, to check where each one truly led. She resisted, embarrassed by her own anxiety. One evening, she went to retrieve Maya's library book from the child's bedroom. She carefully closed her own bedroom door behind her, walked the now familiar but lengthening corridor, and opened Maya's door. It stuck a little in its frame, which was familiar. But when she looked inside, for a brief, stomach-dropping second, Lorraine thought the perspective of the room itself looked off. The bed seemed farther from the wall, a poster hung at an odd tilt, and the window felt further away. Lorraine blinked, shook her head, and chalked it up to tiredness. But when she left and closed the door again, she felt certain it took several more steps than before to return to her room. Amanda and Tim never mentioned anything strange about the house. Even Maya, who whispered stories of ghosts at kindercare, never said the hallway frightened her. Lorraine clung to this, using their calm as a shield. That night, Lorraine sat in bed with a pad of paper, trying to write a letter to her late husband, a habit she had picked up in her loneliest moments. She hesitated, unsure how to put her confusion into words. The best she managed was, "The house feels stretched. The hallway grows. Maybe it is just me. Or maybe something else." She left the letter unfinished, tucked away in her bedside drawer, and lay listening for any change in the texture of the quiet house. Her dreams that night were strange but not frightening, memories of long corridors, train platforms, childhood schools. She woke uneasy, but more determined than ever to find some explanation. Days came and went, and Lorraine's relationship with the hallway grew more complicated. Each journey brought a new uncertainty, and the numbers in her mind became a quiet, ever-present pulse. The house remained calm, the family warm, but something was changing quietly just beyond the reach of their understanding. The strain of the hallway's quiet shifting began to weigh down on Lorraine in ways almost too gentle to notice at first. Yet, by the end of the 3rd week, every trip from her bedroom was measured against an anxious tally of steps and a growing reluctance she tried not to show. She tucked her counting away behind polite routines, watching Maya's cartoons in the den, helping fold laundry, joining Amanda on short walks around the block, yet the feeling remained with her, growing larger in empty hours and at odd times, like during that late afternoon hush just before the streetlights blinked on. Lorraine thought about speaking up several times, but each opportunity wilted as quickly as it arose. Amanda would be mentioning something about new shelves for Maya's room. Tim would come and go, typing on his laptop with the harried focus of someone always mildly late. Even Maya, whose presence usually steadied Lorraine's nerves, seemed wrapped up in her private world of play. Lorraine rehearsed her concerns to herself, quietly, in those lingering minutes between laying down in bed and sleep finding her. But in the sticky darkness, her worries always felt foolish, small, too easy for others to dismiss. Still, the hallway seemed to recognize her silence. In the mornings, it felt somehow wider, stretching out in both directions, not so much that it looked different, but just enough to make each walk feel arduous. She would pause at her bedroom door, waiting to gather herself, then shuffle step by careful step to the bathroom, noting once again the number, 23 now. She never wrote the number down. Instead, she chanted it quietly in her head as a private, uneasy ritual. Worse, Lorraine started to notice a repetition in her days, a cycle that seemed to double back on itself. Her daily routines, fetching water, checking the locked window, brushing her hair in the bathroom, each felt as if they required a little more effort, a longer journey, as if the mere act of crossing the corridor had become an endurance trial. Time began to slip. Mid-morning would turn quickly to evening. Sometimes lunch came and went, and she'd later struggle to remember what she'd prepared. Lorraine worried this was forgetfulness, or perhaps a side effect from her medication. Yet the rest of her senses felt sharp, alive to every nuance of floorboard creak and faint draft slipping over her ankles. The physical details of the hallway began to shift in eerily subtle ways. The family photographs, all arranged in a row along the right-hand wall, seemed farther apart now. The sun-bleached spots on the carpet, caused by that fragile afternoon sunlight, no longer lined up with the baseboards as they had. The linen closet's handle was a finger's breadth farther from the next door than she recalled. She often stopped in the middle of the corridor, palm pressed against the cool plaster, breathing quietly, as if expecting some hidden force to reveal itself. It was in these moments of stillness, standing with the house silent, the only movement her own shallow breathing, she started to think about old memories of apartments, shaped by years and life's slow erosion. Spaces, once so familiar you could walk them in darkness, could still shift over time. But always in ways you could explain: a new table, a different coat of paint, a new rug in the entry. Not like this. This was a difference without a cause. She watched Maya's routines closely, searching for any sign that the child felt something strange about the hallway. But Maya bounded to and from her room, skipping over the plush carpet, humming songs about frogs and princesses. If Maya noticed any oddness, she never said. One twilight, after Amanda had gone out to meet a friend and Tim retreated to the den for a late call, Lorraine lingered on the landing window seat just above the stairs. The sky outside had gone that muted purple-gray that signals true nightfall, but inside, the hallway glowed softly. She sat and listened for the house, beyond the creak of wood or distant clang of pipes, some quieter signal of what was happening to this second floor. She heard only quiet, unbroken but for the steady, pressing thought of distance and the growing sense of being slightly too far from safety, even with the gentle light all around. That night, waking once more at 3 in the morning, Lorraine slid from her bed and peered out her bedroom door. The stretch beyond was deeper than before, swaddled in soft darkness, each door further apart. She started her walk, one step at a time, her hand trailing the wall. The walk to the bathroom felt endless. When she reached the door, her legs trembled, not from age, but from a bone-level sense that she had crossed some threshold. On her return, she paused to look back, and for a fleeting instant thought she saw a door that didn't belong, slim, tall, painted the same color as the others, but unfamiliar. Located at the farthest edge of her peripheral view, right at the corridor's end. She spun, squinting, but nothing was there. The normal 3 bedrooms, the bathroom, the linen closet. No extra door. Yet she couldn't shake the image from her mind. She told herself she dreamt it, old women with night terrors, she joked to herself, but a chill lingered as she tried to sleep. The next day, she told herself nothing had changed. But by afternoon, her unease had claimed a permanent home within her chest. The nights grew longer. Lorraine avoided the hallway after midnight if she could help it. But every evening, after everyone was in bed, she swore the house paused, a subtle hush descending as if the walls themselves drew a long breath. When she had to cross the hallway for water, she felt exposed and off balance, always glancing over her shoulder, checking each door, making sure their brass handles were lined up just so. She found herself reliving old worries from her marriage, times she'd felt left out or lost in sprawling apartments, those memories now colored by the surreal new anxiety that her living space was slipping gently out of the ordinary. The house was warm, the family loving, but the corridor in which she now spent so many waking moments felt less and less like a haven. One gray morning, Lorraine made it a task to open every door in the hallway, carefully peering into each room, Amanda and Tim's bedroom, perfectly neat, Maya's room, scattered with toys and books, the bathroom, as always, the linen closet, full of orderly towels and cleaning supplies. Yet each return to her bedroom felt strangely delayed, as if each walk was tugged out of time and space. Each time, her own room's door seemed farther away, a tiny fraction more distant. She tried tracing the pattern of the hallway with a finger, running her hand over each molding, letting her palm settle on each doorframe. Sometimes she thought she caught a faint change in the temperature of the air, cooler near her room, or perhaps thicker beside the bathroom door. Once she pressed her ear to the wall and listened, hearing only the slow pulse of her own heart, the faint trickle of water in pipes. By now, Lorraine's sleep became patchy. She found herself waking in the middle of the night for no clear reason, the silence around her deep and undisturbed, the distant presence of the corridor quietly pressing in. Each time, she performed the ritual of checking, counting, and reassuring herself. Yet with every morning came an increased sense of dislocation. Half-remembered dreams about long walks down endless halls now bled into her waking life, coloring her moods and thoughts. She wondered how she would ever explain what she was feeling to Amanda, whose kindness was practical and bright but whose energy seemed to come from a different world. Lorraine missed having someone her own age to confide in, someone who might have experienced such subtle oddities, who wouldn't dismiss them as nerves or the drift of old age. Yet she remained silent, her secrets folded tightly away between her memories and the unused letter in her drawer. The hallway had become, in its quiet persistence, a living, stretching thing, a gentle, ever-changing expanse Lorraine could neither trust nor truly challenge. She told herself it was just time, or healing, or age. But as the days bled together, and the corridor grew ever longer, she felt herself letting go of certainty 1 inch at a time. The third week closed with the house still calm, the family still gentle, but Lorraine's world, a few simple doors and a single stretch of quiet carpet, felt stretched impossibly thin, while reality itself began to slip quietly, relentlessly out of reach. The early summer dusk curled down quietly outside, drawing the neighborhood into a hush of soft light and leaf-shadowed stillness. Lorraine sat in the high-backed chair by her bedroom window, overlooking the tops of distant maples, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze trailing where the sun's orange smudge touched the far rooftop. In the silence, the only movement she heard was the slow, regular tick of her bedside clock, paired with a leftover warmth from the day easing out through the glass. Inside her mind, the numbers still pulsed gently, 23, 24, now brushing 26. She marked them silently each night, a private refrain against a corridor with no obvious flaw, no evidence beyond a slow, soft lengthening. She'd stopped writing them down weeks ago. Instead, she'd taken to watching, questioning, and doubting her perceptions, keeping doubts pressed flat under layers of stitched routine. Tim and Amanda had left with Maya for a sleepover at friend's place across the city, an ordinary Friday night, the kind they'd invited Lorraine to join but she'd politely declined, feigning tiredness. She wanted the house to herself, she told them, a rare luxury for someone so often dependent. They'd hugged her goodnight, left quietly, and Lorraine had listened to the car pull away until the sound dwindled into silence. In the hush of the empty house, Lorraine went about her familiar routines, setting out her tea for the morning, double-checking the doors, feeling for the comforting click of each lock. When she made her way up the stairs, the quiet was nearly complete, no children's feet, no distant voice from a hallway radio, just the broad emptiness of her own measured footsteps. She moved slowly, letting her hand drag lightly along the wooden banister, feeling each small groove and nick under her fingertips. At the top, the hallway unspooled ahead of her, dim in the retreating light, soft-edged, and almost misty with the beginnings of dusk. The familiar stretch was longer now, she could see it before she took a single step. The doors at the far end looked smaller, less accessible, the linen closet set further away, the pattern of the carpet bending shyly into new shapes. Lorraine's chest ached, not from fear, but from the weary, quiet resignation of someone finally certain of what they once doubted. She hesitated, standing where the landing ended and the hallway began, feeling the air, heavy, faintly scented with lavender and dust, press softly against her cheeks. She was alone, for the first time in weeks, and the full length of the corridor belonged to her. Something in her expected a rush, a breaking, a sudden shift, a loud protest from the impossible stretch of space, but the house didn't so much as creak. Only the soft presence of growing distance, as if she stood at the shore of a tide that never quite rolled in. She thought back to every number she'd counted, every change she'd dismissed or remembered, to the old photograph, Maya's light steps, Amanda's casual laughter, Tim's distant shuffling in the den. She held all of it at once, letting it drift behind her eyes. She stepped forward, barefoot so her cane wouldn't catch the carpet. The stretch before her seemed like more than a hallway, a low horizon of doors, walls, light fading away. She counted, letting each step flow, unhurried and quiet. The hush around her felt thick, insulating, as if it would never be broken again. 24 steps, then 25, then, an uncertain stop, her foot pausing above what felt like a new seam in the carpet. She glanced behind her. Her own bedroom door sat impossibly distant, a mouth of shadow at the corridor's end. Before her, a faint stripe of light slipped beneath the bathroom door, brighter than the gentle gloom surrounding her. She moved onward, drawn by habit as much as by need. Every step was easier than she'd expected, body light with resolve. Halfway down, she stopped by the linen closet, touching the cool brass knob, surprised by how smooth and unused it suddenly seemed under her palm, as if it belonged in another house, or on some other floor. She again looked down the hall and saw, softly materializing out of the dimness, another door, thin, slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness beyond it. Not quite one of the bedrooms, not quite the bathroom or her own space. A door where none had been before. Lorraine paused, letting a simple, easy breath out. She did not look away. The door was just part of the house. Just a door. For a long, unmeasured moment, she stood perfectly still, feeling the weight of the silent, stretched world around her. She considered what it meant to be alone in a house like this, utterly unhurried, with all the time she could possibly want or fear. There were no warnings, no rush of fear. Only that mild unease, a sense that the hallway had simply grown to accommodate her loneliness, her history, her softened memory. That it would keep doing so, as gently and insistently as anything else in her life. She turned from the strange new door and went back to her room, her steps now slow and without counting, as if the need for measurement had lessened. In bed, wrapped in the quiet, Lorraine stared at the softly glowing ceiling. The stretched hallway pressed lightly at the edges of her awareness, a part of the house she no longer needed to master or mark. She let the soft unease settle in her chest, not peace exactly, and not fear, a drifting, unsettled quiet, like the deep hour before dawn. As she closed her eyes, she felt the house still gently straining at its seams, a slow, patient stretching, always outward, never loud. She let it hold her, drifting easily between sleep and that strange new sense of distance, certain that the house would remain impossibly long and still, with her at its gentle center, for as long as she chose to remember it that way.